Imagine finding a letter forgotten by time, containing a unique account of Jesus. The letter presents Jesus not as a distant figure, but as if someone was present and observing him at the time. Someone who witnessed it firsthand wrote this letter. The person who bravely lowered Jesus from the cross, wrapped him in linen, and placed him in the tomb was Joseph of Arimathea. That man was Joseph of Arimathea. Joseph of Arimathea's position in Jewish society was one of power and influence. He was wealthy, well-connected, and highly regarded among religious leaders. Despite his standing, he secretly believed in Jesus and awaited the coming of the kingdom of God. His actions following the crucifixion reveal a man deeply moved, willing to defy the expectations of his peers and the dangers of Roman rule. Approaching Pontius Pilate, he requested the body of Jesus, an act of defiance that could have cost him everything. Yet he persisted, securing permission to remove Jesus from the cross and placing him in a new tomb he had prepared for himself. This letter, attributed to Joseph of Arimathea, offers something beyond the well-documented gospel accounts. It provides a personal and deeply moving depiction of Jesus, describing his presence as almost otherworldly. The letter speaks of the way he carried himself, his gaze that seemed to pierce through one's soul, and his voice, which brought an unexplainable peace to those who heard it. It paints a picture of a man whose very being radiated something beyond human comprehension. According to the letter, Joseph describes Jesus' eyes as having a depth that made people feel understood in a way they had never experienced before. His voice, though not forceful, carried an undeniable power, commanding attention without effort. His posture exuded humility, yet there was an unshakable certainty in the way he moved. Even in suffering, his presence brought peace. On the cross, when agony should have overtaken him, his eyes still shone with mercy rather than anger. This account of Jesus is unlike anything found in traditional texts. Rather than his teachings or miracles, it focuses on his essence, how he made people feel, and how his presence changed the energy around him. This is what sets the letter apart. It humanizes Jesus while simultaneously elevating him, presenting him as both fully divine and profoundly human. The origins of this letter remain a subject of debate among scholars and theologians. Some argue that it was written by Joseph himself, while others believe it may have been penned by early Christian followers who wished to preserve his testimony. Regardless of its authorship, the content of the letter aligns with descriptions of Jesus from other ancient texts, making it an important document for reflection. The disappearance of this letter from mainstream Christian teachings raises important historical considerations. The selection of texts that would form the biblical canon was a complex process, with many writings left out. The apocryphal texts, including those that speak of Joseph of Arimathea's experiences, often contain details that differ from or expand upon the canonical Gospels. Some scholars believe that certain documents were excluded because they provided perspectives that did not align with the theological direction the early church was shaping. The absence of this letter in religious teachings suggests that it may have been considered too personal, too raw, or too revealing. It presents a side of Jesus that is deeply intimate, a portrayal that connects him to those who knew him beyond the accounts written decades later. The fact that Joseph of Arimathea was a man of high status makes his account even more compelling, as he was not just a follower, but a witness with much to lose. Remember to join our community by subscribing to this channel. Many early Christian writings were either lost, destroyed, or deliberately kept from public circulation. The possibility that this letter was among those hidden away only adds to its mystery. Some believe that fragments of it remain in apocryphal manuscripts, awaiting rediscovery. The question of why it was not widely copied or taught remains part of its intrigue. This letter offers something beyond faith. It offers an emotional connection to Jesus through the eyes of a man who stood by him at the most critical moment. It shows how his presence, not just his words and miracles, profoundly affected those around him. It reinforces the idea that Jesus was not simply a figure of divine authority, but someone who carried an unmistakable, almost magnetic quality that drew people toward him. Joseph's testimony, if authentic, is a spiritual treasure, bringing readers closer to understanding the transformative power Jesus had on those who encountered him. It makes one consider how his presence must have felt, how a single look, a simple ritual treasure, brought readers closer to understanding the transformative power Jesus had on those who encountered him. It makes one consider how his presence must have felt, how a single look, a simple word, or a quiet moment in his presence could leave an everlasting impact. The story of Jesus did not end with the crucifixion. His body was taken down from the cross on April 7th, 30 AD, placed in a tomb, and watched over by those who had followed him in secret. Among them was Joseph of Arimathea, a man whose role in the final moments of Jesus' earthly life was both unexpected and extraordinary. Joseph was no ordinary follower. He was a wealthy, high-ranking member of the Sanhedrin, the very Jewish council that had condemned Jesus. He was a man of influence, moving among the religious and political elite of Jerusalem. Yet, in the hour when others hid in fear, he acted with boldness, going to the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate, and requesting the body of the crucified Messiah. It was a decision that could have cost him everything. With this act, Joseph placed himself in direct opposition to the ruling authorities. Aligning with Jesus, even in death, was an act of defiance. It risked his reputation, his standing, and even his safety. No other account describes Jesus in the same way as this letter. This letter portrays Jesus not as a distant religious figure, but as a man whose presence could alter the very energy of a room. It speaks of his gaze that seemed to penetrate into a person's soul, his voice that carried both gentleness and power, and his posture that was neither arrogant nor weak, but perfectly balanced between humility and authority. Unlike the gospel accounts, which focus on Jesus' miracles, teachings, and fulfillment of prophecy, this letter would have been written from the perspective of someone who saw him up close. Not as a preacher to the crowds, but as a living presence, one that left an imprint on those who met him. During the early years of Christianity, many writings circulated among believers. The official New Testament later included some, such as the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Others, including many personal testimonies and additional writings about Jesus, were left out. Are you enjoying the story? Support our channel by clicking the subscribe button. The process of forming the biblical canon was long and complex. The earliest Christians did not have a single unified text. Instead, different groups preserved different accounts, letters, and testimonies, some of which contained details that varied from the stories that would eventually be accepted by the Church. It is believed that Joseph of Arimathea's letter was among the documents that never made it into the official canon. Some argue that the Gospel's broader theological messages may have rendered the personal and deeply descriptive nature of Joseph of Arimathea unnecessary. Others believe that certain texts were deliberately excluded because they provided a version of events that differed from the accepted doctrine. Over time, as Christianity grew and formalized its teachings, many apocryphal texts were lost, destroyed, or suppressed. Some were hidden away in secret archives, others were burned during periods of religious conflict. If Joseph's letter survived, it would be among these forgotten documents, buried beneath centuries of history. Theories surrounding the disappearance of this letter range from historical oversight to deliberate suppression. Some scholars argue that many early Christian documents were simply lost over time, as fragile manuscripts decayed and were not copied or preserved. Others point to the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, where church leaders formalized much of Christian doctrine, choosing which texts would be included in official scripture. There are accounts of Christian writings being sealed away in monasteries, buried in deserts, or locked in Vatican archives, never to be read by the public. The Nag Hammadi Library, discovered in 1945 in Egypt, is an example of how ancient Christian writings can remain hidden for centuries. Some believe that Joseph of Arimathea's letter was never widely copied because it was written as a private reflection rather than a theological document. Unlike the Gospels, which were meant to spread Jesus' message, this letter may have been intended only for a small circle of trusted followers. Others suspect that it may have been considered too intimate, too revealing, or even too dangerous to the structured image of Jesus that religious authorities wished to preserve. Centuries have passed, yet the story of Jesus remains one of the most discussed, analyzed, and debated topics in human history. His life, death, and resurrection have shaped civilizations, influenced the rise and fall of empires, and provided the foundation for one of the largest religions in the world. But beneath the layers of history and doctrine, hidden among lost texts and ancient traditions, there are predictions, prophecies, and forewarnings that many believe foretold the events surrounding his life and the aftermath that followed. From the words of Hebrew prophets to the writings of early Christian scholars, history has left behind clues that suggested what was to come. Some of these predictions unfolded exactly as foreseen, while others remain subjects of controversy, fueling endless debates among historians, theologians, and researchers. One of the most striking elements of historical forecasting is the extent to which events were foretold long before they took place. The Old Testament, written centuries before Jesus' birth, contains passages that eerily align with key moments of his life. The book of Isaiah, written nearly 700 years before Christ, speaks of a suffering servant who would be despised, rejected, and ultimately sacrificed for the sins of others. These descriptions align with the way Jesus was arrested, tortured, and crucified. Other writings, such as those found in the Psalms and the prophecies of Zechariah, mention details that mirror events recorded in the Gospels. One of the most debated examples is Zechariah's passage describing a figure being betrayed for 30 pieces of silver, the exact amount for which Judas Iscariot handed Jesus over to the authorities. Beyond religious prophecy, history itself presents patterns, repeating cycles of human behavior, societal change, and political shifts. The early spread of Christianity followed a path that historians today recognize as inevitable. Once an idea, no matter how controversial, takes root among the masses, it becomes nearly impossible to suppress. The Roman Empire attempted to crush the early Christian movement through persecution, yet the more it sought to eliminate believers, the more the faith spread. What was once a minority sect, practiced in secret, became the dominant religious force of the Roman Empire within just a few centuries. The Edict of Milan in 313 AD, issued by Emperor Constantine, officially recognized Christianity, marking the beginning of its rise to power. This transformation had been predicted not just in religious circles, but by those who understood the dynamics of persecution. Ideas suppressed too forcefully tend to gain strength rather than fade away. Another major historical development that aligns with early warnings was the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD. Jesus himself, according to Gospel accounts, warned that the city would face destruction. Decades after his death, this prophecy became reality when Roman forces, led by General Titus, besieged and destroyed Jerusalem, reducing the Great Temple to ruins. This catastrophic event reshaped the Jewish world, forcing survivors to scatter and leading to the permanent loss of the Second Temple, a structure considered sacred beyond measure. The prediction of Jerusalem's downfall was not unique to Jesus. Many prophets, political observers, and scholars of the time recognized the growing tensions between Jewish rebels and the Roman authorities. The result was a tragedy of immense proportions, forever altering the course of religious history. These historical events, foretold through scriptures, patterns of human behavior, and the voices of those who understood their time, demonstrate that history is never random. Whether guided by divine intervention or simply the inevitable consequences of human decisions, these events unfolded as though they had been pre-written. Yet, history is not only about the past. The patterns observed in ancient times continue to manifest in modern societies. Suppressed ideas still find ways to resurface. Religious conflicts remain central to global affairs, and the struggle for power, identity, and truth never truly ends. Jesus of Nazareth remains the most influential figure in human history, not just because of his teachings, but because of who he was, both as a man and as something more. His presence was unlike that of any other leader, prophet, or teacher. Those who encountered him were left changed, not only by his words, but by his very being. From the moment he walked among the people, there was something unmistakably different about him. He was gentle yet firm, humble yet authoritative, human yet undeniably divine. Even his critics and enemies could not ignore the weight of his existence. He was not just a philosopher or a preacher. He embodied something beyond comprehension. For those who followed him, Jesus was more than a teacher. He was the very presence of God among them. Yet, despite his divine nature, he did not separate himself from the reality of human experience. He knew the weight of sorrow, the sting of betrayal, the exhaustion of physical labor, and the pain of suffering. He wept. He rejoiced. He grew weary. He loved. Jesus was born into the world like any other person, experiencing the limitations of human life from the moment he took his first breath. He grew up learning a trade, working with his hands, and navigating the ordinary struggles of daily existence. Those who knew him as a child would have seen a boy who played, laughed, and helped his family. But there were moments that revealed that he was unlike any other. His presence had an undeniable effect on those around him. People who met him spoke of a peace that surrounded him, a strength that radiated from his very being. When he spoke, his words carried weight beyond mere human wisdom. He did not repeat teachings passed down by scholars. His words had power. Even those who doubted could not deny that something extraordinary happened in his presence. The sick were healed, the outcasts were embraced, and those burdened by shame found themselves restored. Wherever he went, transformation followed. Yet his life was not one of comfort. He suffered not just physically, but emotionally. He faced rejection, disbelief, and hatred. He was abandoned by those closest to him in his greatest hour of need. He was falsely accused, mocked, beaten, and sentenced to die in one of the most brutal ways imaginable. He experienced pain not just in his body but in his soul. Despite all of this, he never turned away from love, mercy, and forgiveness. Even in his final moments, while hanging on the cross, his concern was not for himself, but for others. He prayed for those who crucified him, offering them mercy instead of vengeance. This is where his humanity becomes so powerful. He did not escape suffering. He embraced it. He did not use his divine power to avoid hardship. Instead, he walked directly into it, showing what it meant to endure, to love, and to sacrifice. While his humanity was undeniable, so too was his divinity. There was a presence about Jesus that defied explanation. He spoke not as a man guessing at the truth, but as someone who knew it firsthand. He performed miracles, not for spectacle, but out of compassion. He controlled nature, calmed storms, healed the blind, and even raised the dead. He forgave sins, something no ordinary person had the right to do. He spoke of a kingdom that was not of this world, a reality beyond what human eyes could see. Even when confronted by those who sought to discredit him, he remained unshaken. Joseph of Arimathea wasn't just a figure mentioned in passing. He was a man who stood at the crossroads of power, faith, and personal risk. His decision to claim Jesus' body from the cross and give him a proper burial was not just an act of kindness, it was a bold defiance of religious and political norms. If the letter said to be written by him is authentic, it would provide a first-hand reflection of Jesus' humanity and divinity, shared from the perspective of someone who witnessed both his suffering and his extraordinary presence. This document, whether lost to time or concealed, represents more than just a historical curiosity. It symbolizes the fragments of history that remain buried, the voices of those who experienced events firsthand, but whose accounts were never widely shared. The possibility that such a letter exists reminds us that the stories we know are only part of a much larger, more complex tapestry. Throughout history, countless texts and testimonies have been hidden, destroyed, or simply forgotten. The early formation of the biblical canon was a selective process, leaving many writings out of the final compilation. These excluded works, often categorized as apocryphal, offer alternative perspectives that challenge, enrich, and deepen our understanding of key historical events. The letter from Joseph of Arimathea would fall into this category, a personal testimony that bridges the gap between the divine figure of the Gospels and the human being who walked among us. Thanks for watching. Join our community by subscribing to this channel. Until the next video.